The tone around Cleveland's quarterback competition has changed again, and this time it is not because of a rumor, a contract report, or somebody trying to read between the lines. It is because the people actually making the decision are starting to explain how they see this battle. Shedeur Sanders is preparing to take the first half reps against Buffalo. Deshaun Watson is scheduled for the third quarter, and Dillon Gabriel is expected to finish the game. On the surface, that sounds like a normal preseason rotation, but when you put everything happening around this quarterback room together, it tells me something much more interesting. Cleveland is still evaluating these quarterbacks on the field, and Andrew Berry just made it very clear that Watson's contract is not going to decide who wins this job. That matters, because the outside conversation had started drifting in a completely different direction. The idea was simple. Watson is making an enormous amount of money. Cleveland has invested heavily in him, and therefore the organization must eventually find a way to put him back on top of the depth chart. That is the narrative that has been circulating. But Berry was asked about it directly, and his answer left very little room for interpretation. He said the decision is going to come down to performance and production, not salary, not reputation, not what a player used to be. Performance. And honestly, that is exactly what I wanted to hear from the general manager. Because once you get into a quarterback competition, especially one involving a veteran with Watson's contract and a young quarterback like Shadur, who is still trying to establish himself, every preseason rep becomes more important than people realize. Coaches are not just watching the final stat line. They are watching how quickly the quarterback processes the defense, how he handles pressure, how he communicates at the line, how he responds when the first read disappears, and whether the offense continues to function when the play does not go according to plan. That is where Shadur has started making this conversation uncomfortable for Cleveland, because the growth is becoming harder to ignore. Against Buffalo, the plan is already set as things currently stand. Shadur gets the first half, Watson gets the third quarter, Dillon Gabriel gets the fourth. And I actually like that setup because it gives the coaching staff another clean opportunity to compare the quarterbacks without creating unnecessary confusion. They can evaluate each player within his assigned window, look at how the offense moves, and then go back to the film. The bigger question is what Shadur does with those first half opportunities. From what we have seen in camp, Todd Monken is not treating him like a quarterback who has to be protected from every difficult situation. That distinction is important. There is a difference between calling plays that help a young quarterback stay comfortable and calling an offense that actually allows him to demonstrate what he can do. And lately, Shadur has been getting opportunities to make real throws. One of the sequences that caught my attention involved Jerry Jeudy. Shadur operated from the shotgun, worked through the coverage, and delivered the ball on a crossing concept where the placement mattered more than the raw yardage. That is the kind of play that can get overlooked when people only look at the box score. But coaches notice those throws. The defender can be in position, the window can be tight, and the quarterback can still win the rep simply by putting the football where only his receiver has a realistic chance to make the catch. That is exactly what I saw from Shadur in several of these camp sequences. There was another throw that stood out even more. The defense created pressure with a twist, and Shadur recognized what was happening while the route developed downfield. He took the shot and put the ball out in front of the receiver with excellent placement. It was not an easy throw. The defender was running with the target, the pressure was arriving, and Shadur still gave his receiver a chance. Those are the moments that change how a quarterback is evaluated. You can talk about touchdowns all day, but sometimes the more revealing play is a 20 or 30-yard completion that never becomes a highlight because the throw is simply placed correctly. That tells me the quarterback saw the coverage, understood where the leverage was, and trusted the timing. And that has been one of the more encouraging parts of Shedur's development. Berry specifically talked about his processing speed improving. He talked about Shedur's natural accuracy and his touch on the deep ball. But he also pointed to something that I think is even more important: pocket movement. Shadur is not just standing there waiting for everything to be perfect anymore. He is getting better at navigating the pocket, buying a little extra time, avoiding negative plays, and still keeping his eyes downfield. That is growth. There was also a sequence where Shadur moved around inside the pocket, and created enough space to get the ball to Blake Whiteheart. It was not some spectacular 40-yard scramble. It did not need to be. The quarterback simply recognized that the pocket was changing, adjusted his feet, bought the necessary time, and kept the drive alive. Those plays matter, because NFL quarterbacks live in those moments. The perfect pocket does not exist for an entire game. At some point, pressure is going to get through. A receiver is going to be covered. The protection is going to break down. The quarterback has to turn a bad situation into something manageable. And that is one of the areas where Cleveland appears to be seeing legitimate improvement from Shadur. Then you have the red zone work, which adds another layer to this entire evaluation. Shadur connected with Dylan Sampson on a quick route near the goal line, getting the football out quickly and allowing the running back to create after the catch. That is exactly the kind of decision that makes an offense efficient inside the 20. You do not always need to hold the football and hunt for a spectacular throw. Sometimes the correct answer is sitting right there. Take it. Get the ball to your playmaker. Let him finish. There were also creative concepts involving the tight end and movement across the formation. That is where Monken's role becomes fascinating to me, because the offense does not appear to be completely stripped down around Shadur. There is still creativity. There are still layered concepts. There are still situations where the quarterback is being asked to make decisions, rather than simply execute predetermined throws. And that brings me back to the Watson comparison. If you watch the way Cleveland approached Watson's preseason reps, the philosophy appeared much more conservative. Quick slants, quick hitches, screens, simple throws, designed to establish rhythm and get the quarterback comfortable. That makes sense for a veteran coming off a difficult stretch and trying to get himself back into a rhythm. But with Shadur, the offense has increasingly looked willing to let him operate. That does not automatically mean the coaching staff has decided he is the starter. I want to be very clear about that. Preseason success does not guarantee a starting job. One impressive practice does not settle a quarterback competition, but it does mean the evaluation is becoming more meaningful because the coaching staff is giving him opportunities that allow us to see the complete skill set. And when you combine that with what Andrew Berry said, the situation becomes much more interesting. Berry was asked directly whether Watson's contract creates pressure on the organization to start him. His answer was essentially a rejection of that entire premise. He pointed out that teams inevitably have highly paid players who get outperformed by players making much less money. That is simply how professional sports work. He even used James Harrison as an example of why salary cannot determine who plays. That is a significant statement coming from the general manager, because if Berry truly believes that performance is the deciding factor, then Shadur does not have to beat Watson financially. He does not have to beat Watson in reputation. He does not have to beat Watson in experience. He only has to beat him on the field. And that is a much more realistic battle. Berry also praised both quarterbacks, which is important because this was not some subtle announcement that Watson has been eliminated. He said both have done good things in the preseason. He talked about Watson operating the offense well, navigating the pocket, being accurate, and making good decisions. He also acknowledged the mistakes, including the fumble on 4th down and the delay of game penalty. Then he turned to Shadur, and the language became especially interesting. He said the Browns are continuing to see major growth in Shedur's processing speed. He highlighted the deep ball. He mentioned the accuracy. And again, he specifically brought up the way Shadur is moving within the pocket. That is the kind of evaluation that goes beyond, "He looked good." It tells me the Browns are watching the exact areas that determine whether a young quarterback can eventually operate an NFL offense consistently. And there is another piece here that I think gets overlooked. Cleveland's offense puts a lot on the quarterback before the snap. The quarterback has to understand what the defense is showing, get the offense organized, make adjustments, and then execute. That is not a simple system where the quarterback can just receive the snap and wait for the play to develop. Berry said both quarterbacks have handled that responsibility well. For Shadur, that is encouraging because it means his improvement is not happening in isolation. He is improving inside the actual structure of the Browns' offense. Now, there is still one major warning sign, and Cleveland cannot ignore it. The turnover. Barry acknowledged it. Shedeur himself apparently acknowledged that his eyes were in the right place and that the decision was sound, but the throw was not executed correctly. That distinction matters. A quarterback can make the correct read and still make a bad throw. The film has to determine whether the mistake came from the decision, the mechanics, the pressure, or simply poor execution. From what Barry described, the pocket was compressed and pushed into Shedeur's lap, which affected the trajectory. That does not make the interception disappear. It does, however, give the coaching staff something specific to coach. And that is what preseason is supposed to be. You are not looking for perfection in August. You are looking for information. The Browns are trying to figure out which quarterback gives them the best chance to win when the games actually count. That means every good rep matters. But every mistake matters too. Shedeur cannot simply string together impressive throws and expect the competition to disappear. He has to show that the impressive moments are becoming consistent. That is the next step. Because the difference between a talented quarterback and a reliable starting quarterback is often consistency. Anybody can make one beautiful throw. NFL defenses eventually find the weaknesses. They disguise coverage. They change pressure looks. They force quarterbacks to make decisions faster than they want to. They attack the pocket. They make you prove that you can execute the same fundamentals over and over again. So, when I look at Buffalo, I am not expecting Shedeur to come out and throw for 300 yards with 3 touchdowns. That would be unrealistic, considering how the preseason rotation is structured. He may only get a limited number of meaningful possessions. What I want to see is how clean those possessions are. Does he get the offense lined up quickly? Does he recognize pressure? Does he protect the football? Does he take the easy completion when it is there? Does he attack downfield when the coverage gives him the opportunity? Does he move when the pocket starts collapsing? And most importantly, can he string those things together without creating unnecessary negative plays? Those are the questions that matter more than one highlight. The Buffalo game is also interesting, because Cleveland has not been giving opponents a complete look at its offense during this part of camp. There is a reason teams do not spend the entire preseason preparing as if they are playing a regular season opponent. Coaches want to install concepts, build rhythm, evaluate players, and keep some things hidden. That means we should be careful about overreacting to play calling. If Shedeur gets a quick screen, that does not mean Cleveland suddenly does not trust him. If Watson gets a few easy throws, that does not automatically mean he is winning the competition. Coaches are managing the preseason differently from the regular season. The context matters, but within that context, the individual quarterback decisions still matter. And Shedeur has been giving the staff reasons to keep watching. That is probably the most important thing happening right now. He does not need Cleveland to announce anything after every practice. He does not need the organization to publicly crown him. In fact, the longer this competition stays technically open, the more valuable every opportunity becomes for him. Because if he keeps stacking good film, eventually the conversation changes on its own. The contract argument disappears. The rookie argument disappears. The "he needs more time" argument gets harder to make. At some point, you are simply looking at the quarterback who performed better. And that is exactly why Barry's comments matter so much. If the front office really is committed to a performance-based decision, then Shedeur has an opening. Not a guarantee, an opening. Watson still has an opportunity to take control of this. He is an experienced quarterback. He knows what NFL defenses look like, and Cleveland obviously invested heavily in him for a reason. If he goes out there and plays efficient, decisive football, he can change this conversation quickly. That is why I do not view this as Shedeur versus a contract. I view it as Shedeur versus the standard Cleveland has set for the position, and that is a much more interesting competition. The coaching staff is going to compare everything: how the offense looks with each quarterback, how teammates respond, how quickly the huddle gets organized, how the ball comes out, how the quarterback handles adversity, how many drives end in points, how many opportunities become wasted possessions. Those details are going to determine the decision. And there is one thing about Shedeur that makes this especially fascinating. confidence. You can see the difference when a coaching staff trusts a quarterback to take a shot. The quarterback plays faster. He does not spend every snap worrying about making a mistake. He starts trusting his eyes. He starts trusting the route concepts. He starts attacking the defense instead of simply surviving it. That appears to be where Munkin is trying to get Shadur. Not reckless, aggressive. There is a difference. When the deep ball is there, take it. When the underneath throw is there, take it. When pressure forces you to move, move. When the defense gives you an opportunity, capitalize. That is how you build an NFL quarterback. And if Shadur can bring that mentality into Buffalo while eliminating the unnecessary mistakes, I think the pressure on this organization becomes even greater. Because then, Cleveland is no longer just evaluating potential. They are evaluating production. And production is exactly what Barry said will decide this. I also think the supporting cast gives Shadur a much better environment than what he had during some of the difficult stretches previously mentioned around his Cleveland experience. The Browns have playmakers on the perimeter. They have backs who can contribute in the passing game, and they are clearly trying to create an offense where the quarterback does not have to win every snap by himself. That matters. Quarterbacks are evaluated as individuals, but football is not an individual sport. Protection, route separation, play design, field position, and defensive looks all influence the outcome. A quarterback needs help, and if Cleveland can give Shadur enough of that help, we may get a much clearer picture of what he actually is. That is why I am watching the Buffalo game differently than I would have a few weeks ago. Earlier in camp, you could look at the competition and say, everybody is getting reps. Everybody has a chance. Now I am looking for momentum. Who is taking advantage of the opportunities? Who is making the coaches rethink their assumptions? Who is making the next decision harder? Right now, Shedeur is doing enough to keep those questions alive, and that is exactly what he needs to do. I do not think Cleveland is going to make a decision because fans want one. I do not think they are going to make a decision because social media is loud. And based on Barry's comments, I do not think they are going to make a decision simply because one quarterback has a massive contract. They are going to watch the tape. That is where Shedur's opportunity really exists. If the tape keeps showing accurate throws, better processing, improved pocket movement, smart decisions, and enough explosive plays to punish defenses, then the conversation becomes very difficult to dismiss. And Buffalo could add another layer to it. Maybe Shadur comes out and looks exactly like the quarterback Cleveland has been seeing in practice. Maybe he creates a few explosive plays. Maybe he makes a mistake and then responds correctly on the next drive. Maybe the most important thing he does never even makes a highlight reel. That is what I will be watching. Because quarterback battles are rarely decided by one throw. They are decided by accumulation. One practice, one meeting, one preseason drive, one third down conversion, one pressure handled correctly, one turnover avoided, one opportunity after another, and eventually, the coaching staff has enough evidence to make the call. For now, the evidence is still being collected, but the fact that Andrew Barry had to publicly address the contract narrative tells me the noise around this competition has become significant enough that the Browns understand people are watching closely. His answer was direct. Money does not determine the quarterback, performance does. That puts the responsibility squarely on the players. And for Shedeur Sanders, that is probably exactly where he wants it, because he cannot control Watson's contract. He cannot control what people say on social media. He cannot control the narratives created outside the building. What he can control is what happens when the ball is in his hands. So when he steps onto the field against Buffalo and takes those first half snaps, I am not going to judge him by whether he produces some ridiculous preseason stat line. I am going to judge him by the details. The operation, the reads, the accuracy, the pocket, the decisions, the response to pressure, the response to mistakes. That is where the real quarterback competition is being decided. And if Shadur continues showing the kind of progress Barry just described, then Cleveland is going to have a very serious decision to make. Not because of hype, not because of a contract, not because somebody outside the building demanded it, because the football might force the decision. And honestly, that is the most compelling part of this entire situation. Shadur does not need anybody to hand him the job. He needs to keep making it harder for Cleveland to give it to somebody else. Buffalo is another opportunity to do exactly that. And, if he takes advantage of it, the conversation after the game could sound very different from the one we are having right now.